Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked on Wolves. Today on the show, the Dame Lillard trade went down on Wednesday. What is the trickle-down effect? Could Jrue Holiday be an option for the Timberwolves? I'll tell you why. Spoiler, I don't think he is. I'll kind of break that down, why I still love Mike Conley with this Timberwolves roster. And then also the Timberwolves signed yet another non-roster invitee in Tyrese Martin. We'll talk about Martin, and we'll talk about basically all those guys that aren't on guaranteed contracts for the Wolves. Who has the best shot at making the team? What primary skill sets they all have? We'll break it all down on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked on Wolves.
You are Locked on Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked on Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked on Wolves. Happy Thursday, everybody, and a big thank you for making Locked on Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find this one. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV, along with all the other fantastic Minnesota Locked On podcasts. The Twins are about to play in the playoffs. The Vikings, yes, they're 0-3, but still exciting start of the NFL season. There's a lot of season ahead. The Gophers had a rough week last week, but a couple of big games upcoming, and of course the Wild kicking off preseason this last week as well. Again, the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Locked On T Wolves and also at B Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. All right, so the big news in the NBA, of course, the Damian Lillard trade going down on Wednesday midday. Dame being traded to the Milwaukee Bucks as part of a 3-team deal. And I'm not going to break the whole deal down. This is, after all, a Timberwolves podcast, so I don't want to spend too much time on this. But I do want to talk about the Jrue Holiday implications, because as soon as this trade was done, the Jrue Holiday vultures began circling, if you will. And maybe that's a dramatic analogy, because Jrue Holiday is far from a carcass of an NBA career. He's still a fantastic defender and a really good all-around player. So understandably, tons of teams now reportedly are interested, actually, but fans of teams have been clamoring for their squad to trade for Jrue Holiday. And of course, there's a bit of that chatter in Wolves land. And I love Jrue Holiday. He was, in fact, the kind of that final piece, if you will, to that Bucks championship team from a couple of years ago. And obviously he's been with the Bucks now for several years. But it's real quickly from Milwaukee. I like that they're doing this. I don't know that it makes them overall that much better, but it does improve their ceiling, right? If Dame is still, and when he's been healthy the last couple of years, he is still Dame, right? There's still enough tread on those tires, and he's a really nice fit with Giannis. The question is, well, how does that offense mesh? And do they have enough perimeter defense? Now, I think the answer is yes. I do think that the ceiling of the Bucks certainly improves. There's no question about that, because Dame and Giannis are so perfect for each other, and Lillard is so good offensively, and Giannis is so good defensively, right? Well, he's great on both ends of the floor, of course, but I think that this will make the Bucks better, and I think that it was a good swing to take. I think Jrue Holiday, as an all-around player, isn't all that much below Dame Lillard, but in terms of meshing and what the Bucks needed, this makes sense. Jrue Holiday is still a really good offensive player and one of the better perimeter defenders in the league still today at age, whatever he's going to be this year, 32, 33. So he goes to the Trailblazers along with DeAndre Ayton from the Suns, a couple of other picks and pieces, and then the Suns get Grayson Allen, Yusuf Nurkic from the Blazers, Allen from the Bucks, Nurkic from the Blazers, as well as Nasir Little and Keon Johnson. So, I think it makes sense for the Suns to move off the Ayton thing. I actually think Nurkic isn't a bad fit for them. The question is, can he do? I think he's a good enough defender. I think he's maybe a little underrated on that end of the floor. So I really kind of like the trade for everybody, but not in a big, I don't think anybody, quote unquote, won this trade other than Dame getting to go to a contending team, even if he didn't necessarily want to go to Milwaukee. But the Timberwolves implications here, Jrue Holiday, as I mentioned, everybody wants Jrue Holiday, right? He's the type of player that could plug and play with almost any team because he is a two-way player. He's a really good defender and he's a strong offensive player. He's a good shooter. He's by all accounts, a good teammate, works hard. Everybody likes him. So understandably, a lot of teams want him. Now, one of the complications is he's got 1 year left on his deal. He's getting paid like 35, 36 million this year. He's got 37 million. One more year after that, it's a player option. So undoubtedly he would almost certainly he would opt in because he's not going to make that much annually once he hits the open market. And unless, very likely he's not going to have a problem still getting a multi-year deal after next year. So would Jrue Holiday be a good fit on the Timberwolves? Absolutely, he would be. Is he better than Mike Conley? In a vacuum, you could make that argument, yes. It's a very different argument than who's better, Mike Conley or D'Angelo Russell, because D'Angelo Russell and Jrue Holiday are extremely different players, and so are Conley and Russell. Like Conley and Jrue Holiday, there's a lot of similarities between the two. I would argue in a vacuum, Jrue Holiday is a better player than Mike Conley. But is he a better fit for the Timberwolves? Well, I think he'd be about the same. And turns out you don't get Jrue Holiday for free. You're giving up assets to get him. And I'm setting aside the complications from a salary standpoint, like trying to figure out how to match those, because Conley's making, I don't have like 15 million less than Jrue Holiday this year. And he's also, Conley comes off the books next offseason. Jrue Holiday would be 1 more year at 37 million, which would be nice, right? Like you want that extra year, but it doesn't solve your long-term point guard issues. You're paying more money for him. You got to give something up to match salaries. I don't even know what the Wolves would trade. A lot of their tradable pieces, they just signed this offseason and aren't eligible to be traded yet. So I don't even know. I'm sure there's a way to do it, but it'd be complicated to try and pull it off now from a salary standpoint and still feel good about that trade. And also, it's not like the Wolves have a ton of picks to trade. And do you really want to give up assets for what I would term this? It would be a marginal improvement. There's a lot of similarities. Yes, Jrue Holiday is 4 years younger. He's a better all-around scorer. He's a better offensive player at this point in his career. Across the board, Jrue Holiday has been a better offensive player than Mike Conley throughout his career. I don't think there's any question about that. But he's also a much higher usage offensive player. Do the Timberwolves need that? Mike Conley last year, or actually, let's do this. I actually pulled the last 2 seasons. So Conley, season and a half in Utah, and then post-trade deadline in Minnesota, and Jrue Holiday, of course, with the Bucks last 2 years. They played in a similar amount of games. They each played in, Conley played in 139, Holiday played in 134. Minutes are within 300 minutes of each other. So very close comparisons. And a lot of their statistics and their metrics are eerily similar. One of the biggest differences is Jrue Holiday's usage rate is 6 points higher than Mike Conley's over the last 2 years. Okay. So now, of course, Jrue Holiday was being asked to essentially be the second offensive star next to Giannis in Milwaukee. And Conley, I mean, he was on a mediocre Utah team for much of last year, and a couple years ago with Utah. You still had Donovan Mitchell, Rudy Gobert. You still had Bogdanovich. Like, he was option 4 as he is in Minnesota. But that's kind of my point, right? Mike Conley's never been a super high usage offensive player, and especially not now when he's about to turn 36. What did the Timberwolves do at the trade deadline last year? Well, they moved off of a high usage point guard in D'Angelo Russell. That's oversimplifying it, yes, quite a bit. But they don't need a guy that's going to use a ton of possessions himself offensively when you already have Anthony Edwards and you have Karl-Anthony Towns, both of whom are as or more efficient, younger, more development to be had. And then you throw in Rudy Gobert. You don't need Jrue Holiday. I just think Mike Conley actually fits this roster better. And again, it's the same argument I made with the D'Lo trade. You could argue in a vacuum, D'Angelo Russell standing here right now at age 28 or whatever he is better than Mike Conley at age 36. That's not a crazy argument, but he's not a better fit for the Timberwolves. Just like I don't think Jrue Holiday is necessarily a better fit. I actually think it's pretty similar. And if you weigh all the factors, and I'm just talking on court. I'm not talking salary. I'm not talking time of year, which I'll get to in a second, because that might be the trump card here. I just don't think there's significant upside. Jrue Holiday's a better one-on-one defender. He's a better point of attack defender at this point. He's got a little more tread on the tires, if you will, than Mike Conley. They're both really good team defenders. Their 3-point percentage is almost identical. Mike Conley, 39.7% from 3 the past couple of years. Jrue Holiday, 39.6%. Conley has a higher 3-point rate because he's a lower usage guy that's shooting catch and shoot threes. That's exactly what the Timberwolves want. Their free throw attempts, by the way, this is crazy. They've shot the exact same number of free throw attempts over the last 2 seasons. They're each averaging 2.9 free throw attempts per game. No, I'm sorry. That's per 36 possessions. Where'd it go? Okay, so per 36 and per 100, because of if you factor in the number of minutes. Per game, Jrue Holiday is averaging 2.7 free throw attempts per game. Conley, 2.4. They're within 0.6 of a percentage point on shooting free throws. They're within 0.1 of a percentage point on shooting threes. So the shooting percentages that matter are nearly identical. The true shooting percentage is roughly the same. Like, it's crazy. The difference is Jrue Holiday is just using more possessions. Conley's happy to stand and catch and shoot threes. What do the Wolves need? They need somebody to catch and shoot threes. Sure, it'd be nice to have a slight upgrade in point of attack defense to Jrue Holiday, but at what cost? What are you trading to acquire Jrue Holiday in this scenario when you already have Mike Conley? And then the last point is time of year. It's the last week of September. It's going to be October this weekend. Training camp kicks off right now. Why rock the boat for a potentially marginal improvement while still spending assets? All things considered, a Jrue Holiday trade right now would be negative for the Timberwolves. Time of year, rocking the boat. Once again, recycling the point guard position, giving up additional assets, and maybe improving your offensive versatility slightly and your defensive, your point of attack defense slightly. But Conley's simply a better fit for this team. And you throw in all those other factors, it makes no sense. I don't think Jrue Holiday is an option. I don't even know how they do it salary-wise sitting here right now. You know, maybe if something happens, if Conley, God forbid, gets hurt or just really looks old the first few months of the season and Holiday's stuck on the Blazers, maybe it's a trade deadline conversation. But in September, October of 2023, I don't think this is a realistic option for the Wolves. And I wouldn't spend any more time thinking about it at this stage of things. All right. The Timberwolves did make another training camp signing on Wednesday. I thought they were done. They kept going. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about who they signed, all about them, and then also kind of, in a sense, handicapping the end of the roster, right? The Wolves now have like 5 guys that are non-roster invitees to training camp. A lot of them have like 1 or 2 NBA skills. A couple are more well-rounded. I'll quickly spin through all that after we talk about Tyrese Martin, the Timberwolves' latest camp signing. We'll get to all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at DoorDash. Are you missing the syrup for your pancakes? I hate when I do that. I've done it before. Maybe you ran out of your favorite coffee or coffee creamer. I just ran out of K-Cups for my carry the other day. It was the absolute worst. But with DoorDash grocery delivery, you can get what you want right when you need it. You've trusted DoorDash to deliver your restaurant favorites, as I do all the time. But now you can also get grocery delivery that actually delivers too. With thousands of grocery stores to choose from, you'll find the best in your neighborhood and boost your local economy with each and every order. You'll get exactly what you ordered, or they'll make it right. So sit back and enjoy quality groceries just like you picked them yourself. If you want even more value, you can save on all your grocery and restaurant favorites with a $0 delivery fee on all eligible orders with a Dash Pass membership. With easy substitutions right in the app and best-in-class customer support, DoorDash delivers groceries exactly how you want it. Get 50% off your first DoorDash order up to a $20 value when you use the code LOCKEDONNBA at checkout. It's a limited-time offer and terms apply. That's 50% off to $20. No minimum subtotal and 0 delivery fees on your first order when you download the DoorDash app in the App Store and enter the code LOCKEDONNBA. Don't forget, that's code LOCKEDONNBA for 50% off your first order with DoorDash. All right, a big thank you once again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, every day, as we're going to be back to talking player previews on Friday. This the Jrue Holiday, the Dame Lillard trade, and then also another Timberwolves signing kind of hit the pause button here on Thursday. But we'll get back on Friday. My plan is to talk rookie Leonard Miller and then second-year guys Josh Minott and Wendell Moore Jr. That'll be the plan for Friday's show. And, of course, then next week, we got real basketball. We've got, preseason real basketball next Thursday. So we'll get into that early next week. Of course, we're daily right now, back to daily Monday through Friday. So be sure to follow and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. All right. Continuing on, the Timberwolves signed Tyrese Martin on Wednesday. Tyrese Martin, it was a second-round draft pick last year by the Warriors, traded on draft night to the Hawks. And he actually got into 16 games at the NBA level with the Hawks, but played in 23 G League games. So we have a bit of a professional sample size, but I do want to spend more time talking about his profile as a draft prospect because, we're only a year removed from that, right? So it's not like it's a crazy stretch. His background, he played college at both Rhode Island and UConn. And was a strong player for UConn during their tournament run. Not obviously they won the championship last year, but the year before that, of course. He is 24, so he's an older second-year guy. But he's a well-rounded shooting guard is probably the best way to describe him. In college, the most interesting thing is that he had a leap in college with his three-point shooting percentage. At Rhode Island, he was 32%. First year at UConn, 32%. His last year at UConn, he shot 43% from three-point range. So an 11-point jump in terms of three-point shooting. Last year in the G League, he shot 36.6%, obviously a deeper three-point line. So that kind of backs up the jump from 32% in college. I mean, you look at his first 3 years in college, he's under 32%. To jump to 43 and then to settle at almost 37% at the G League three-point line last year. And that's 23 games. It's almost 800 minutes. So that's a pretty decent sample. That suggests to me that the shooting has continued to improve. And if you go back and look at his draft profile, there was a lot to like about him. The biggest thing for me, and I should give some of the I mean, he's 6'6", so he's a bigger guard. He can initiate some offense. He can play make a little bit. He really is more of a two. He's a solid defender and a solid athlete. Like, neither of those things really jump off the page to me, but decent athleticism combined with decent size. And the thing that's most impressive is how hard he plays. And I talked about this the other day with Trevor Keels, who we'll get back to here in a minute, but knows for the ball, plays hard. To combine what I just said, he's also a hard-nosed player. He plays tough, plays big, plays aggressive. All of those things combined with decent size and athleticism means he could be a pretty good defender at the NBA level. I think he could be a plus defender. And he could be a solid playmaker when called upon. He's more of a secondary playmaker type. There are some similarities to Keels. I really think that there are. And I think one of them has a real shot at earning the last two-way contract, or maybe, probably not, but maybe that last standard 15, number 15 roster spot on the guaranteed, the guaranteed contract roster for the Timberwolves, the standard roster. Again, the most impressive thing, he plays hard. He's well-rounded. He could rebound the ball extremely well. You go back and look at college rebound rates for Tyrese Martin, really impressive. He had a total rebound rate over the course of all of his 4 years in college of over 12% for a guard, a 16.3% defensive rebound rate. His senior year at UConn, 13% total rebound rate, a 17.9. So call it an 18% defensive rebound rate. For a little bit of context, and again, I do this all the time with college rate-based stats. It's not apples to apples, but context matters, and I think this can help paint the picture. His last year, again, I'm going to say that I'm going to make sure that I reiterate this. His last year at UConn, Tyrese Martin had a defensive rebound rate of 18%. On the Timberwolves, that would have ranked, if you take out AJ Lawson, who played in one game, that would have ranked 5th behind Gobert, Josh Minott, who only played in 15 games, but I trust that rebound rate would stick if he played more, Naz Reid and Karl-Anthony Towns. It would have been ahead of everybody else that played the 3 and the 4 for the Wolves, including Kyle Anderson, Anthony Edwards, actually a higher defensive rebound rate than Luka Garza in the 28 games he played, higher than Nate Knight. The total rebound rate that he had in his last season at UConn of 13% would have ranked 6th on the Wolves. Actually, no, 5th on the Wolves, behind Gobert, Naz Reid, Josh Minott, Luka Garza, and Karl-Anthony Towns. So this guy could rebound for a guard. He's got the size to do it. He's got the stick-to-itiveness to do it. He is another one of those players who, as I like to say on the show, has some of that do stuff ability where he does all the fringe things. He could be kind of that perfect glue guy role player in the same vein as Trevor Keels, where, say you're down a couple guys, he's on a two-way, you're a little short-handed, it's a back-to-back. You need somebody to come in and be a professional basketball player and be well-rounded and do multiple things well and play hard. This is one of those guys. I don't think the upside is massive, but I do think there's upside here for him being a legitimate rotation player. Like, I don't think it's crazy to think that if he gets a bit more run at the NBA level, Tyrese Martin could end up being your 9th or 10th guy. Now, that's not the plan, right? The plan is he could be that guy in a pinch. He's your 14th, 15th guy, and you have a guy out, you're on a back-to-back, you have foul trouble, you plug him in, and he's fine. That's the ideal scenario. But there is a world in which, because he's so decent at everything, he ends up being a more consistent NBA role player at some point in a couple of years. Now, again, he's older. He's going to be 25 here soon. Older for being a second-year guy in the league. But the key, I think, is the shooting. If the shooting's real, and the nearly 37% last year in the G League and the 43% his senior year of college, if that's real, you can plug and play him and feel good about it. And he's maybe the player, it's either him or Keels that I'm most excited about to kind of round out this roster, the training camp roster at least. And I'm really interested. I also should point out, the Timberwolves haven't officially released the training camp roster. I think it's coming today on Thursday. But I'm curious to see if Javonte Cook's on it. The Timberwolves never confirmed the Javonte Cook signing. Of course, he was on the Iowa Wolves last year on the Summer League entries the last couple of years. And his agent announced about a month ago that the Wolves were signing him to an Exhibit 10 deal, but the Wolves haven't announced it. And if he is on the team, that's 21 players in camp. And everything I've seen is that the team is limited to 21 players in camp. So I'm wondering if maybe one of the recent signings took Javonte Cook's spot. We'll see here soon enough. And maybe perhaps the 21 number that I've been running with is off, I guess. I don't know. I'm pretty confident it's 21, 15 standard roster spots, your 3 two-way contracts, and then, non-roster invitees up to 21. So my hunch is Cook's not going to be part of this list, but we'll pretend as though he is. And I want to kind of handicap the 5 guys that are competing for what I would argue the last two-way spot. We've seen conflicting reports on whether Matt Ryan's actually been signed to a two-way or if he's in camp fighting for the two-way, or if, he's on a two-way and might lose it type of a thing, and or for that 15th standard roster spot. So I want to kind of run down the list of guys real quick, give a one-liner on each of them and my take, and that's how we'll close the show here today. All right, the Timberwolves coming into training camp have 21 or 22 players. I'm not going to list off every single standard contract guy they have, but they have 14 guaranteed contracts. They have 1 standard contract spot available. They've got 2 players officially on two-way contracts that we know of, Jalen Clark and Luka Garza. Matt Ryan earlier this week was announced as a two-way signee by media, and then John Krasinski of The Athletic followed up and said, hey, to be clear, he's competing for one of these spots. It appeared as though the NBA transaction log actually had it listed as a two-way deal. So we don't know if Matt Ryan's actually signed a two-way and they have their 3 filled, and they're just kind of saying, like, hey, it's an open competition. We could still waive you. We're not out a whole lot, like whatever. Or if he's on an Exhibit 10 type contract with the opportunity to compete for that third two-way. So I'm going to lump him into the conversation. So you have your 14 guys that are on the team, Jalen Clark, Luka Garza also on a two-way. And then your other list of players is Vit Krejci, it's Daishen Nix, it's Trevor Keels, it's potentially Javonte Cook, it's Matt Ryan, and now it's also Tyrese Martin. So of those players, who has the inside track? Well, Matt Ryan's the one that was with the team last year, and theoretically, he provides the best shooting, although you could argue that there's a couple of these guys who, he probably is the best all-around shooter, or no, not all-around, best proven three-point shooter is a better way to say that, of this list of players, although, as I talked about the other day, if he's a sharpshooter, he's got to be a better sharpshooter, right? So Matt Ryan may have the inside track simply because there's familiarity, and if he shoots as he apparently does in an empty gym, then it makes sense to have him in that spot. The other players, Vit Krejci gives you passing and size and maybe more upside in terms of youth, decent athleticism, really good size, basically a combo guard that's 6'8", a fantastic passer, some offensive upside, and some a pretty good defender as well, for being a modest athlete. So Krejci is maybe the most intriguing from an upside perspective. Daishen Nix, I'm maybe the least excited about on this list, other than maybe Javonte Cook. Nix is more of a volume scorer, not super athletic, good size, but hasn't proven himself at the professional level in a couple of years with the NBA and in the NBA. He has the most NBA experience of anybody on this list. So in that sense, you could argue he's got maybe an inside lane. I don't think so. I think he's probably last on this list in terms of, like I said, guys that I'm actually excited about. So Krejci passing size, really upside. Daishen Nix volume scoring at a similar position as Krejci. Javonte Cook is a theoretical 3-and-D guy, is how I keep describing him. He played D2 ball for most of college and was in the G League last year, and the numbers aren't great. The shooting's okay. The size is really good and the athleticism solid. So the hope is that he can develop a jumper and be more consistent defensively, and he has good size, as the Wolves like, to be a flexible. Think of him almost like a Taurean Prince, who's best cast as a 3, but could he play small ball 4? Could he play some 2? That's all possible for Javonte Cook. We talked about Matt Ryan, Trevor Keels, who signed the other day. He is a hard-nosed defensive player, has a bit of offensive upside as well. And he's, I guess, the more I think about this, he's probably my favorite all-around option for this role, for the last two-way role. And we talked about Tyrese Martin. So I would say Keels and Martin fit the bill in terms of guys who you can rely on as professional two-way type players who could do multiple things that still have a bit of upside. Now, Keels is younger. Keels is a bit younger. They each have 1 year professional experience, and that might be Keels' advantage. And I think he's also certainly a better defensive player, which to me tips the scales in his favor. But I don't mind Tyrese Martin, and I think he should have a shot at this two-way contract as well. He was on a minimum contract last year. So remember, Keels was on a two-way with the Knicks last season. Martin was actually in a minimum contract with the Hawks and on their roster and bounced to the G League and back. So I think those two are the most intriguing to me. Matt Ryan, I get it if they keep him. It doesn't excite me unless he can actually shoot the ball in a game situation at, I don't want to put an exact number on it, but let's call it significantly above league average. If that's the one NBA skill he has to provide it. Again, Krejci is the upside swing, and Nix is the volume scorer. Javonte Cook is the theoretical 3-and-D guy. My money would be on either Martin or Keels to take that two-way for Matt Ryan and for the Wolves to leave the 15th standard roster spot open. And I think I said this on Wednesday's show as well. I think they leave it open for some flexibility. I'd be surprised if they made a trade at this point. And maybe when they get to the end of camp, if somebody's got a nagging injury and they need to rest somebody at the start of the season or whatever, maybe they do plug somebody into that spot. And if it's, hey, we need more backcourt help, maybe it is one of those guys. If they need a bigger wing, maybe it's Matt Ryan. If they need, there aren't really any bigs in this conversation. You're looking at the same bigs that you'd expect the Wolves to have. So they all kind of play some combination of combo guard, combo forward, wing, right? But that's also what Chris Finch wants to do. It's what Tim Conley wants to do, is have a lot of positional flexibility, find these guys that can play both ways. And that's kind of where we sit right now. So it's going to be fun, actually. This is more exciting to me than the end of roster battle last year. I think the Wolves actually had 15 contracts with some guaranteed money going into the year last season. And even though the top of the roster is much more talented and this team in general has more depth, that last roster spot, they're just going to kind of play with and see if any of these guys really impresses them in camp. And, one could land that and one could land a two-way of these. You include Matt Ryan. That's 6 guys we're talking about battling for 1 to 2 spots max. And the rest very likely could end up in Iowa, the Iowa Wolves of the G League. So we'll keep an eye on all that. Again, preseason starts next Thursday in Abu Dhabi against the Dallas Mavericks. Friday show, the plan is, unless we have more news to talk about, we'll do the season preview for rookie big Leonard Miller, who's like the one big on the roster that won't, well, I guess Luka Garza, one of 2 bigs on the roster that won't be in the regular rotation to start the season. What could his role be? Also, Josh Mina and Wendell Moore Jr., who are the 2 players that have, in my opinion, the most ambiguous roles this year. Because you could convince me that one or both of them ends up in the rotation, or that neither of them sees the court regularly at all this season. I think it all just kind of depends on how the year starts and obviously injuries. But, what kind of roles could these guys carve out as the second-year guys who need to prove something this year to be part of this team's long-term future? So we'll break down all 3 of those players, do season previews for them on Friday's show. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find this show. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon at Fire TV. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.